We have about 4 million students at private colleges within the US. By our count, as many as 370 of the institutions serving those 4 million students are at very significant risk of closure in the coming decade. You should certainly be taking a close look at the financial sustainability of the institutions that you are considering.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Office Hours. My name is Will Geiger, co-founder of Scholarship 360. On Office Hours, I break down some of the biggest trends impacting higher ed and what those trends mean for students and families. Today I sat down with Peter Stokes, who's a managing director at Huron Consulting Group, and talked all things college closures, including how we got here and some of the signs that students and families should be aware of that might indicate a college is in danger of closing. This is an episode you're not going to want to miss, so let's dive in. Hey everyone, my name is Will Geiger, co-founder of Scholarship 360, and I'm excited to be joined today by Peter Stokes, who is a managing director at Huron Consulting. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you very much, Will. Very happy to be here.
So, Peter, one of the first questions we like to kick these conversations off with is around myths and misconceptions in higher education. So I'm curious from your vantage point, what the biggest misconception that the general public has about higher education right now?
Sure. Well, I guess I would say one of the things I've learned over the decades is that when people talk about higher education, they typically are imagining a, ivy-covered walls, a quadrangle out in front of the main building, 18-year-olds who are living on campus. And certainly that is a version of higher education that folks do experience. But the reality is that really only reflects about a third of students enrolled in higher education. And so there are many, many other kinds of higher education out there, from, evening classes for adults to community colleges for two-year students. So one of the big myths, I think, is that when we think about higher education, we are picturing one image, when in reality, we need to be thinking about many different sorts of images.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really great point. There is this, kind of like media movie, driven idea of what college is like, and it seems like that sort of trend is just accelerating as upskilling becomes more important, and people, are looking to sort of piece their education together throughout their life in ways that may not be like that kind of traditional like going at age 18, moving to an
Right.
on-campus, residence dorm.
Yeah, absolutely. And so obviously that affects some of the expectations that folks have about attending college as well. Expectations with respect to living on campus or the total cost of attendance. Community colleges are, by and large, very, very affordable. And so when we have a conversation about access or quality or affordability in higher education, we really need to look at those issues by different market segments. And again, it's very dangerous to generalize. We do have institutions where the cost of attendance is $100,000 a year. That's a reality. But we also have institutions where the cost of attendance is a few $1,000s. So in reality, there are many kinds of higher education. There are many kinds of price points in higher education, many kinds of points of entry to higher education, enrollment experiences that folks can have. And very much to the point you were just making, one of the ways in which higher education is going through a transformation right now is in attempting to become more responsive to the needs of the workforce and to provide greater workforce development support. And that means shorter form programs, helping people transition in careers or advance their careers. And we are also seeing one of the, stimuli for this is federal programs like Workforce Pell, which will take effect in 2026, to provide federal funding to help learners get some of those shorter form credentials. So again, that just speaks to the diversification of audiences, the diversification of ways in which colleges and universities can serve those audiences, and then ultimately what we are thinking of when we think of higher education. It's much more multifaceted than we might generally think.
Yeah, I think that's a great reminder for listeners. I think there is, it's, very reinforced, I think, by the, sometimes media focus on certain very highly selective, expensive schools that I would argue for many families are, do not actually wind up being like that expensive, certainly for some, but not for all. But that's only, that is a minority of learners in the US are being educated at those types of institutions. And appreciate you bringing up community colleges. I think that's such a great like pathway. So many states, that's your a Pell Grant or other types of funding that's going to make community college very very affordable, if not free. There's a lot of states that have great articulation agreements as well for students, which provides a really great pathway to a credential.
Yeah.
Um, on the, I guess if we're kind of taking, zooming out, Peter, one of the things I was really curious to talk to you about was on the college side. We're seeing this trend, and one data point that captured this was from the Hetchinger report that colleges are closing at roughly a pace of one per week. Just kind of curious, like what do you think is causing this on the college side?
So, I mean, we've had about 100 institutions close since 2020. The rate of college closure is accelerating. Um, and the fundamental reason is the 2008 recession. And so during the recession, folks tend to get conservative about their spending. One of the ways they also get conservative is they have fewer children. And so, as a consequence, for the past many years now, the U.S. birth rate has fallen below a replacement birth rate. So, the consequence of that is that we have fewer high school graduates. So, coming, uh, so this is a forecast. So, just to be clear, in June of 2025, we had our largest high school graduating class ever as a nation. But because of the demographics resulting from 2008, the number of high school graduates is now going to decline precipitously over the next decade. And this has already been happening in certain regions of the country, like the Northeast, which is where I am situated. And so some institutions have been dealing with these demographic challenges for some time now. There are a handful of states that are seeing population growth. Utah is one, Texas is another. So there are some states that are actually seeing positive growth in population and positive growth in the high school going population. And that means that there will be more graduates in those states. And so for states that are recruiting prospective students in their home states, that's a good thing. But in many other states, the number of graduating high school students has been in decline and will now continue to decline for the next decade. So that's called the demographic cliff. It's not really a cliff. It doesn't actually drop off immediately. It's much more of a rolling hillside, but nevertheless, it creates real financial challenges. So given all of that, we essentially have smaller private institutions, by and large, that are very tuition dependent, that are no longer able to recruit classes sizable enough to fill their dorms and to fill their classrooms. And so the consequence of that is that those institutions are taking in less tuition revenue, and their costs of operating continue to go up. Electricity is costing more, heat is costing more, et cetera, et cetera. And so the financial challenges start to mount and eventually become unmanageable. And unfortunately, too many institutions wait until it is too late before they begin thinking about alternatives. And there are some alternatives to closure, uh, but too many college presidents and too many boards of trustees are reluctant to consider those options before it's too late. And so that's one reason why we're seeing an increase in college closures.
No, I think that's a great overview. And just yeah, interesting that this goes all the way back to 2000 2008, and just interesting how that all trickles down. Out of curiosity, I know for some schools they might be thinking about like international like student markets as being an option. Obviously, I think some of the I think some schools are not necessarily bullish on that given the policy landscape, but from your research, it was that 2008 trend like consistent like across the world, just as far as graduating high schools, senior equivalents in other countries. That also that rolling
Right.
hill you described.
Yes. So the replacement birth rate issue. So in the US, the replacement birth rate would be about 2.1 children per family. What we have as a fertility rate in the US is on average 1.6 children per family. So significantly below the replacement rate. That figure is fairly common in Western democracies and in some other environments. In Asia, Japan is facing a similar sort of population crunch. So this is by no means restricted to the US. The causes in some of those other countries are different. They weren't necessarily related to the last recession. But this is a common challenge, certainly in the Western world. And just to put this in some historical perspective, we had an enormous expansion of higher education capacity in the US after World War II. So many folks who might be thinking about, finding a college for their child, their son or daughter, probably had a parent who participated in this massive expansion of higher education post World War II. So of course we had the GI Bill that brought, an enormous number of folks into higher education that had not been there previously. We had greater numbers of women attending college after World War II. So right after the war, we had fewer than 2 million students enrolled in U.S. higher education. If we fast forward to right around 2008, the recession, we had 21.5 million students enrolled in U.S. higher education. So a tenfold increase over 60 years. In 2010, we hit the peak enrollment. Since then, we've declined from 21.5 million to about 18.5 million. And that was before the demographic challenges really took effect. Now, those numbers are going to further decline. And some say, you know, in certain regions, another 15 to 20%. So we have too many seats in too many classrooms at too many institutions. And so we have an imbalance of supply and demand. Now, the demographic forecasts have suggested a number of different scenarios, but effectively, this decline will plateau in about a decade, and then it will remain essentially constant for the remainder of the century, right? So, say for the next 60, 65 years. Now, those are long-term forecasts, so take that all with a grain of salt. But fundamentally, we will have fewer students in the future than we've had in the past, and that means we need to adjust how many institutions we have and how many seats we have in the classroom. Private institutions are those that tend to close because public university systems are more likely to consolidate their campuses rather than close them. But we do occasionally see public college closures as well.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and interesting that it should be the projections anyway at this point are fairly fairly level, when we think through the rest of the century. Um, I'm curious, is there a perspective where this is like a there are benefits or to the educational system for students, for institutions, that maybe this sort of culling is going to make for a stronger, healthier higher education ecosystem?
So, I mean, if we think about it from the prospective student perspective or the parent perspective, you want to have faith that the institution you're going to enroll in is going to be there by the time you finish your degree, and even long after, right? Because you want your alma mater to succeed. You want its reputation to increase over time. That ultimately has a halo effect on alumni as well. So you want confidence that the institution is going to be there. Right now, there are hundreds of institutions that are at risk of closure, um, simply because of their financial strength or weakness. And as a consequence, there are parents and students who are evaluating those institutions who may enroll there and may find that during their time there, the college merges with another institution or closes. And, the data suggests, broadly, that when a college closes, only about half of the students at the closed institution actually enroll in another institution.
Mm.
So right away, you have a displacement of a significant number of students who are enrolled at the college. And further, those that do continue, only about half of them finish. So college closures are enormously disruptive for learners. And because of the accelerating rate of closures that we've seen over the past few years, there are some students who have actually had their school close, they move to another school, and then that school closes. And that's really a terrible experience for a learner, highly disruptive. And so, one of the benefits of getting through this difficult period of rebalancing is that students and their families will have greater confidence in the sustainability of the institutions that they're considering for their education. And once we get to that rebalancing, we'll have a kind of an equilibrium in the system that can be positive, really, for everyone. Equally, faculty right now at these at-risk institutions are very concerned about their jobs. Staff at these institutions are very concerned about their jobs. So there's lots of anxiety that comes from the difficult financial position that these institutions are in at the moment. And so once we can work through that pain of seeing institutions close or merge with other institutions, we will get to a healthier ecosystem that will ultimately reduce some of the stress for everybody involved.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense, Peter. I'm guessing just the types of students who are enrolling at, probably, less selective, very tuition dependent, small private institutions, over index on more Pell eligible students, first generation students. I'm curious, is there any, research for the students who are not, continuing on at other colleges or not graduating? Do they, are underrepresented students overrepresented among that population? Do you have any sense of that?
That's a great question, and I would not be able to give you a precise answer to that question. The types of colleges that are closing are not necessarily the most diverse student bodies. Um, and and I would say, the greatest diversity that we have is going to be on the public institution side by and large. And so, again, we do have fewer closures there. Um, but that's a very interesting question. I'm not sure what the answer to that might be in detail.
Yeah, it makes sense that, yeah, just for students, they're, really like thrown a wrench, when, I know, not to name specific examples, but for some of the colleges closing, it's, done with very, very little notice for,
Right.
students or faculty members, and you're sort of scrambling a bit. And I think that is, as a consumer of higher education, just, disturbing. Just because for, these kids who are not eventually getting a degree or continuing on at another institution, they probably have student loans, and they're going to be having that carrying that burden, without having a credential that's going to, increase their earning potential.
And and
Um,
and just to put some sense of scope on that, so we have about 4 million students at private colleges uh, within the U.S. And by our count, as many as 370 of the institutions serving those 4 million students are at very significant risk of closure in the coming decade. Um, they represent about 600,000 students. So um, that's a lot of students who could experience some very negative consequences from those institutions closing. There's a further 430 institutions that face what we would characterize as moderate risk, and they represent 1.2 million students. So, collectively, we're talking about something like 1.8 million students out of about 4 million. So, this is something that families who are considering smaller private tuition dependent institutions really need to be thinking about. And it's not to suggest that every small private institution is at risk, but you should certainly be taking a close look at the financial sustainability of the institutions that you are considering.
Yeah, what are some of the things that families like might be able to do? I know one piece of advice I've gotten as a former college counselor is, look in the local papers. Sometimes there'll be coverage of an institution that might be in distress, and that might be, just in so many small institutions, especially ones that are in small towns and rural places. They are also really essential, parts of the economies of these towns. But I'm curious, there are other data points that families can look at as they're going about their college search.
Well, looking at the local news is absolutely a, a simple way to go about it. When colleges start to get to the danger zone, it's always a subject of public discussion. And so, again, that doesn't mean that every school that is challenged is necessarily going to fail or close. But it's important for families to recognize, is this an organization I want to invest my dollars in order to help my student, succeed? So local news absolutely is something to look at closely. If there has been a sudden surge in new program offerings, if there's been a recent promotion of a program to help students, transition to careers, when colleges are struggling, we do often see a very rapid effort to launch a number of new programs and to start making promises they hadn't been making previously about the career outcomes of their education. And so when you start to see a number of new initiatives, it may be too little too late in certain instances. Beyond that, all nonprofit organizations are required to file their financials, and for those who are interested, you can always get access to those financials through various public databases. That requires having some understanding of higher education finance, but there are ways to test that out. And certainly students who are at those institutions will know if there's anxiety on campus about the future of the institution. And so speaking with students who are there is another good way to learn a little bit more about the school.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it earlier part of the conversation, just calling out that, faculty members, administrators, they're, going to be aware of this as well. And unfortunately, it's, none of this happens in a vacuum. And I'm sure that just, creates a less ideal learnings, situation and environment when, probably a lot of faculty are thinking about like trying to, find other jobs or just concerned about
Right.
their, own families. And, the same thing with administrators. Yeah, I know that, we've seen, certain schools like, do layoffs. I guess that would be another,
Mhm. Yes.
another, data point for students and families. But yeah, I think that those are some good things that folks can look into, ranging from simple to a little bit more complicated, just as you're, especially for seniors and juniors, as you're thinking about your college list. I do think that this, should be a part of it as you're selecting a school. You're going to be investing at least, probably like, 4 or 5 years of time into earning your
Right.
degree, and taking this into consideration, just because you've shared the data. It is very, very disruptive, and for students who are forced to transfer for colleges and to find another home, and just the outcomes for those students, don't seem to be great. So, seems like a benefit to families and students to not put yourself in that position.
I mean, one other thing that you point to there that is also relatively easy to observe is, are there vacancies in the cabinet level positions at the institution? Because, as you say, faculty and staff know when things aren't going well, and you do see folks who leave early in order not to be there when things become untenable. And so, if you have a large number of interim leadership positions, that may be a signal. If you have a significant number of unfilled leadership positions, that could also be something to take a look at.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. As we wrap up the conversation, Peter, I kind of want to connect, back to the first question. Just argument that the future of college is, perhaps going to be, more flexible, more options for learners. I'm just kind of curious how what you see the landscape looking like. In the next like 5, 10, 15 years. It sounds like, maybe there'll be less schools, but for the schools that are left, what are they going to be looking like?
Well, once upon a time, there was a view that we had K-12 education, and then we had higher education, and then we had corporate training, right? So folks would go off into jobs, whether they were, welding jobs or financial jobs, whatever it might be, that there would be training on the job, and that these were three very separate domains of learning. One of the ways that higher education is evolving today is that it is reaching back into high schools. So we see many more learners having the opportunity to experience dual enrollment. That is, to get college credit while they're in high school. And sometimes students can get, as many as a semester's worth of credits, sometimes even a year's worth of credits. That can shorten the time it takes for them to get a bachelor's degree. It can reduce the cost of acquiring a bachelor's degree. So that can be very useful. And then we're also seeing higher education institutions attempt to deliver more value as professionals move into the workforce, and to make up for the declining spending that employers are putting into training. And so, in a sense, the expectations for colleges and universities are moving both, backwards into the high school and forwards in the workplace. And this is going to require universities and colleges to think about a different model of education delivery, a different kind of faculty role that is not always going to be about doing research as well as teaching, but might be focused almost exclusively on teaching. So that's something else that we'll see evolve over time. But essentially, colleges and universities have an opportunity to make an even greater contribution to the education and career development of their students. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the positive note to end on. I've been thinking a lot about this. We have an 8-month-old daughter at home, and yeah, just constantly thinking about what like college will look like for her. 18 years from now. And I think it'll be interesting, but I think that makes a lot of sense just looking both on the high school side and we're big fans of the dual enrollment and any opportunities just to earn credits as a high school student. I personally did that, was able to graduate college in 3.5 years, which was really great and saved my family, quite a bit of money. And it also seems like there's a lot of opportunities and I guess probably a necessity now for some of these, especially some of those smaller institutions, to be working in conjunction, particularly with local industry and local commerce, to make sure that their graduates are going to be relevant in the whatever areas that they're working in.
If I could
Um,
just add one more thought,
mhm.
there are a handful of schools in the US right now that are also offering 3-year bachelor's degrees. And so a bachelor's degree is typically around 120 credits. Um, but there have for a long time been schools that would offer you the chance to do 120 credits in 3 years. But there are now institutions that are offering 90 credit 3-year bachelor's degrees. Essentially, everything that you would get in a normal undergraduate degree program minus the electives. So you still have your major, you still have the gen ed, but you just don't get a broad range of electives. That's another way of saving families a full year of tuition and helping learners get into the job market as quickly as possible. There's only about a half dozen institutions offering that today, but there will be dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, in the next 10 years offering that kind of degree.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, have you read the book, The Innovative University?
Hmm.
Um, I remember the story of just how Harvard decided to, create a 4-year degree and just how mimetic like higher education is. Everyone just sort of copied that.
Hmm.
So yeah, you could definitely envision a lot of institutions copying this as just a way of offering a faster, cheaper credential to students, and that being a real hit in the marketplace.
Yeah.
Um, well, thanks so much, Peter, for your time. I think they're, really appreciate you lending your expertise on this subject. And I think there's a lot of, just a great information giving, families and students, the context and kind of how we got here, but also some really actionable ways that they can use this information and sort of assess the viability of some of the colleges that they're considering. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Will. Really appreciate it.
Thanks everyone for tuning to another episode of Office Hours with Will Geiger. If you're a student or parent, don't forget to check out app.scholarships360.org, where you can sign up for our free scholarship matching platform. For colleges, we've got solutions to make your work easier, which you can check out at connect.scholarships360.org. And one last thing, if you or someone you know would make a great guest on the show, I'd love to hear from you. You can always reach me by email or on LinkedIn. Until next time, thanks again for listening.